Hello, everyone. Here we are at the happy hour. I hope that if you folks can, in fact, see me at this point, we want to welcome you to this, our third edition of our online happy hour. We do want to apologize. We're working through a little bit of technical issues with one of our guest video feed, but this is the new world that we live in. So such is life, and we learn to live with things that are unexpected. And if this is the only thing that we have to deal with that is unexpected, is a small technical glitch in an online humanities happy hour, considering everything we're dealing with, I think we're in good shape. I want to just reiterate that we, as Carolina Public Humanities, have so many people to be thankful for all the time. I want to thank all of our supporters, all of our attendees who we miss tremendously, and participants that come to our programs who are missing out. Well, we miss you. Hopefully you miss our programs. I see a face there. Well, you know what? Just stay right there before we lose you, Pam. Normally, I like to introduce our guest one-on-one and have you magically appear. So why don't we make Gabriel appear as well, and you can both be in our. You can both be part of this wonderful introduction. I've got a few pieces of information for everybody. So welcome. These are our two panelists: Gabriel Trop from Germanic Languages, the Germanic and Slavic Languages Department, and Pam Cooper from the Department of English and Comparative Literature. Pam, if you want to pull your thing down a little bit. There we go.
Sure.
There's your whole face. There you are.
There we go. There we go.
There we go. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for joining us. Normally, we turn on your visuals just at the right time, so it's like this magnificent entrance. But we've had to forgo that because I don't want to lose you. So
no, I don't want to be lost.
No, exactly. But it's hard to get lost. We're all at home, but figuratively, I suppose, in this case. I want to just mention we have a few events. We're trying, again, we put these on as quickly as we can organize them. The happy hour is running great. So we have happy hours scheduled out for at least the rest of the month of April. Our next happy hour is going to be on April 16th, and it's going to be on music, just like we've been doing with, we did that with theater. Now we're doing literature and books. And we'll be doing music next week and talking about various aspects of listening to music, playing music, and whatnot in these very strange days. On that's April 16th. The day before that, we have a new program coming out. We're doing something called Talking Humanities, and what we'll be doing is taking articles. For example, the first one coming up will be, because we like to test things out with ourselves. So Lloyd Kramer and I, two French historians, we'll be reading an article that recently appeared in the Atlantic about about comparing these days to the beginning of the French Revolution. There are a lot of really interesting articles coming out trying to place these events that we're going through in the context of historical events in literature, religious ideas. And so we're going to try to seize the zeitgeist, if you will, by having small discussions. These will be open forum discussions with limited number of participants. And our first one of those will be on this French Revolution article in the Atlantic on April 15th at 5 p.m. And information on that will be forthcoming. We also have, I hope some of you were able to tune in last night for our newest coworker, Joanna Sirk-Smith, had a wonderful presentation on food security in the Triangle area during these days. And she's going to be continuing this food theme on April 22nd. With a wonderful program on restaurants and the future of restaurants in the pandemic. I saw some good titles for it coming up, but I don't have the full title on that one. So we have a book talk on the plague coming up. If you folks are gluttons for punishment, you are more than happy to come and log on to my Facebook and hear me read the plague out loud in 20 minutes installments, which I've been doing to kill the time, if for nothing else. But we will be having in May a book group on that, and we hope that you'll sign up for that. But enough talk about all of these programs. Let's talk about tonight. One final thing I want to remind you folks is we do have a Q&A button at the very bottom of your screen. And what we're going to be asking you to do is to give some suggestions. Thank you, Carrie, has already given us a wonderful suggestion, and we will address those as we come, including yours, Carrie. So thank you for that. So look down if you want to put things in the Q&A at any time. Feel free to do that, and we'll try to get to those. We certainly will dedicate time at the end of the discussion to address as many of them as we can. And we do have some mystery guests. But let's start with our guests. This is the big reveal. Our two guests have already been revealed. Welcome, Pam. Thank you for joining us, and welcome, Gabriel. Thank you for joining us. How are you holding up in these circumstances? I'll start with you, Pam. How are you holding up?
I think I'm doing okay. It certainly has been a process of adaptation. I don't like getting into apocalyptic battles with my computer, as I did this afternoon. And I'm very grateful for the nice weather and the spring foliage. So I guess I'm hanging in.
Yeah, it's so funny. You look outside every once in a while. I mean, I did get out there today, and so I've spent whole days inside and thinking to myself, that's just crazy. And, you know, when the weather is like this, to be doing that. But Gabriel, how are you doing in your home seclusion?
Very, very well. I'm fine every time I'm not on Zoom.
Yeah, exactly, right? Well, I was saying in the opening, I find that Zoom really brings out the blue in my face. So it's really, you know, we've all have this wonderful aspect to us. So I've brought you both here because both of you work with books. Now, of course, Gabriel, you work with books written in a different language from what I understand, but there's still literature and there's still books, and I bet you have some ideas. And I've asked you both to think about some texts that you, for whatever reason, think might be interesting or helpful to read at this time. And we'll see where this conversation goes. There are many reasons why we read literature. We read it to distract us. We read it to give us comparisons with historical events or events in literature. We do it sometimes for some sense of spiritual fulfillment. Whatever it is, what books are you reading? Pam, let's start with you. What's a text you think is a helpful text for us in this situation?
Well, there are, of course, the novels. I work with novels. There are the novels that deal with plagues. You mentioned The Plague by Camus. And the other one that I really love is Journal of the Plague Year by Defoe, Daniel Defoe. Mm-hmm. So those are sort of very pertinent to our situation now. Sorry?
Why do you think it is that reading about, because some people said to me when I was reading The Plague out loud, saying, why are you doing this when this is the thing that we're all trying to, why is it we like to read about what we're going through in a way?
I think we try to find reflections of ourselves in literature at difficult times. And I think we look for perhaps coping mechanisms that others have explored along the lines of what you were saying earlier, Max, about looking back. Mm-hmm. And trying to find how other people have coped. And fiction, of course, tells us that, even though it's not factual, obviously. But I find in my own reading that I'm looking more for comfort these days. Mm-hmm. I haven't cracked open either of those books. Mm-hmm. I've been going back to books that I know and love, and the two that I'm mostly enjoying now are E.M. Forster's Howard's End and Michael Ondaatje's novel The English Patient. Both of which are novels that I've taught many times, and I've written on The English Patient, and they're just wonderful books that take me away.
Is that what they share in common? Is there a particular way in which they take you away that you're looking for in novels like this? Because they're written at very different times. But,
very different.
Yeah.
No, in fact, they have very little in common, both in terms of subject matter and in style. But my history with both of these books is what connects them for me, because I have loved them and do still love them.
So it's like kind of going back to a literary home.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, nicely put. And they both have very, very beautiful film versions.
Yes, indeed. I think many people, when you say those names, I think they just sort of associate the films, both which I believe came out in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So associate these the films, but of course we all know books are better than movies. Shh, I didn't say it. Yes, Gabriel, what do you think about those choices? Are you familiar with those texts?
Yeah, I'm familiar with The English Patient. I haven't read the Defoe. Camus, I'm familiar with. There's, I mean, for plague literature, a good one is Boccaccio.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the Cameron, and they're all, we talked about that in our first one. Lloyd Kramer loves especially the opening, what do you do when a plague hits?
Right, you tell stories, right, to make a community. And I think, you know, what Pam was saying is very interesting about, you know, if you go on Netflix and or you know, Amazon Prime, you look at the most popular movie and it's Contagion. You know, the first thing when a Contagion hits, you know, everybody wants to go watch the film that basically, I think, also helps them deal with the uncertainty. To see it treated in literature makes it seem perhaps like it can be managed. In addition to being then, you know, there's a community of sufferers that emerges from these works of art, basically, that everybody's kind of suffering together.
Is there a particular text besides the Cameron that you teach, or that you come to for home, if you will, as we were talking about with Pam?
Well, you know, there are quite a few books that I mean, I generally, in this day and age, were I to teach works of art, I would probably go straight to Kafka. Because I've heard our current situation described as Kafkaesque multiple times.
So what do you think people say that a lot, and I think I might be guilty of this as well. I've read Kafka, everyone's had to, but I've used the word Kafkaesque probably above my pay grade. So what do we really mean when we're getting at Kafkaesque, when people use it to describe what we're going through now?
Well, I mean, what people usually mean when they talk about Kafkaesque is something that is, it's a notion of reality that is slightly out of joint. In our situation, so you get many things
like
can
waking up as a cockroach or something like that.
Yeah, or very out of joint, very out of joint. It can be used in other ways, though. For example, overwhelming bureaucracy, right? Just kind of, this can't really be happening to me. The thought that this is impossible. I think maybe the Kafkaesque could also be described as the reality of an impossibility. Something that couldn't be happening and yet is the case.
That's very fitting, I think, for sure. Pamela, are you finding texts that make you think about comparing what's going on in the book to reality? Do we have Pam?
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
I don't see you anymore. You've become a black box, but we can hear you.
Oh, well, can you hear my voice?
I can indeed.
All right. Well, I don't know what's happened, but I don't want to touch anything in case I blow up or something.
Okay. Well, we'd love to hear what you have to say about this sort of the Kafkaesque, if we could jump off of the Kafkaesque and thinking about the relationship between reality and literature in this sense.
Well, I can't go to Kafka right now. It's just it cuts too close to home for me, and I already feel we're living in such a surrealist moment. If I woke up and found myself a cockroach, I feel that I'd hardly even be surprised at this point.
Cockroaches get to go outside at least, you know.
That is true, and that's an advantage. but otherwise, I am finding, if I want an echo, though, the writer that I go to is J.M. Coetzee, the South African novelist, who I think really has his sort of finger on the pulse, not only of the present, but in some ways of the future as well. His novels are very dark. But I think they're sort of packed with wisdom about that sense we can get of living on the edge, living on some edge of time in which we don't know what's going to happen. So Coetzee I can go to, and the other one that I love for an echo is, of course, Margaret Atwood. Wow. Margaret Atwood has the Mad Adam trilogy. Her latest science fiction trilogy, in which we get a tremendous plunge on her part into environmental problems, into media problems, into illness, There's a motif that runs through that trilogy of a virus that is manufactured and unleashed on the world in order to wipe out the humans, the human species, and replace them with a better biogenetically engineered model. So if I want to get the horrors, and sometimes I do, even though I'm going mostly for literary comfort food, now and again I feel like having a little horror. I'll go to Atwood and I'll go to Coetzee, but then I'll usually come back to the books that I can slip into as if they were a pair of old slippers, you know.
You know, it's interesting about this period we're in. It's also an interesting time to be reading. The act of reading, of course, you know, we read to take ourselves out of our lives, and now we suddenly have a lot of time. You know, what is this? Do you find that the act of reading will be different and the act of comprehension will be different, or the way that we read will be different? I love throwing the tough questions at Gabriel because he wasn't prepped for this one at all. But, you know, this contemplative time, is it a different type of reading? I'm finding when I'm reading The Plague out loud because I have time. When was the last time you read a book entirely out loud and sort of slowly and let the words? So is there something about the act of reading in this particular time, Gabriel, that might be salubrious?
Unfortunately for me, it has, and I say unfortunately, it has not changed. Because, you know, being an academic, I end up really only reading what I am writing about. So I've done actually—
You're not doing this right.
I know. I've done very little leisure reading. What I have been doing, however, is audiobook listening. And so I highly recommend audiobooks in general. You can walk. I mean, if you're going to go outside and get a breath of fresh air, you can walk at the same time and listen and walk. And I do like that. I have been listening to, and this I'm not writing about, Ovid's Metamorphoses recently.
And what is it you're getting out of that? What is it? Why do you keep listening and not turn it off?
Well, I think I am slightly masochistic in my reading tendencies, and I think it's a very violent text. It's a text that's full of I mean, it's about the transformation of forms and mythology, of course. And there's great beauty in it. There's Orpheus. There's it ends in a kind of a political allegory, which now in hindsight strikes us as somewhat ironic, with the, you know, Augustus Caesar, who will last forever, but he too is transient, just as transient as everything else. And basically, I think that book it's about the trauma of becoming. It's a traumatizing book. There's a lot of violence, a rape. The gods are awful. You have the sense of a world that is deeply painful. Plague surfaces there too. Anything that changes you or that transforms you, Ovid it's grist for his mill. And it has, but just the way, what I love about the book is the way it transforms itself from one topic to another. You're just it's so subtle in the way it changes. And so it's a book that, like if you ever read Proust, this is another good time to read Proust, by the way, because this, you know, one of the things that we have now, a lot of us have, is time. Unfortunately, I don't, but some people find themselves having time. So these big books, I think, if I weren't teaching and if I didn't have papers to work on, then I would definitely be turning to Proust, Thomas Mann. And there are these sentences that just grab you, and they're like it's like being on water. You can't really get out of the flow, right? It basically puts your state of mind into a type of a flow.
And it's a time where we can read, you know, not you, because you can't read for these aesthetic things because you're so busy, but if you were reading for these aesthetic things, it's a time for us to appreciate the flow of language. Like I said, you know, reading out loud and slowly, I'm like, wow, like crafting a sentence and even though it's the translation in this case, just the beauty of language and whatnot. We have a little bit of time to listen to that. Pam, is there some stylistic people that just by the style of their writing you would say might be good distractions for us, or just through their style and their voicings open up new ways of thinking about the conditions that we're in, or the conditions that the authors were in?
Yeah, as far as style goes, I'm a great fan of Ian Mcewan, who is someone that I've taught several times, and I guess my favorite novels of his are of course Atonement, and I think in some ways stories of romance, even if it's rather dark romantic stories, are a good distraction in strange times like this. But his newest novel is called Machines Like Us, and it's a very interesting foray into not quite science fiction, but something sort of hovering on the edge of that genre, and it's about robots. And the creation of machines that look so human and can function as human beings. It explores the idea of a love triangle involving two human beings and a male robot. So
I didn't expect that.
If that is the kind of thing you like, it is really quite intriguing, and I found it very absorbing. I think Mcewan is an incredible stylist. He has a command of the language that is just absolutely beautiful. To read him is like watching an acrobat or a ballet dancer. There's just this perfect poise, and this lovely sense that you're in the hands of a writer who's absolutely trustworthy and is going to take you somewhere where it's worth going. And I always love that. And then I discovered quite recently, and am enjoying very much, a writer called George Saunders. He's a short story writer, and his short stories are really wonderful and quite shocking. But he has a novel called Lincoln in the Bardo, which won the Man Booker Prize, I think, in 2018, and it's a very interesting exploration of Abraham Lincoln's grief over the loss of his son Willie. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful and unusual exploration of that very emotional terrain. Not so much a distraction for now, really, because I think we are grieving. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things we have to confront really is how much grief and loss are a part of our experience right now. So I've been dipping into the literature of grief, and I love the way that Saunders uses this interesting idea of a kind of afterlife. He uses the Buddhist notion of the bardo, which is almost a kind of a purgatory space where souls have passed, but they're still moving around, they're unresolved. And he uses that to explore Lincoln's almost overwhelming grief for his son. So for me, some sort of science fiction. I like science fiction, and I like literature that sort of bends reality. I like magic realism. I like those odd kind of forms, and I found in those two books both an escape and also an unexpectedly relevant commentary on what we're going through now.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. There are so many ways to think about the metaphors for what we're going through. It's you had mentioned metamorphosis, Gabriel. It felt like, in a way, it feels like we're in a cocoon. You know, we shut down society. We've gone into some sort of, and now we're sort of, what's going to emerge on the other side of it, right? Or the metaphor of grief. You know, we've of course there are many people who are literally losing people, and we think of all of those who are suffering from the effects of this disease, but we are also sensing a sense of grief or uncertainty, maybe, that we don't know what we've lost. You know, it's odd for us to not be able to be in commerce with people like this. So these are really interesting metaphors to pick up on in terms of, what to read, and how a reflection on grief might even be a reflection on our political body itself, or community, or society and community. You know, I would like to offer, you had mentioned magical realism, and I do like to offer a book every once in a while. And a book that I think is a wonderful escape is it's actually a book of prose by the poet, South American poet, Alvaro Mutis, The Adventures and Misadventures of Mackerel. And if anyone wants a wonderful study, he's a poet by trade who wrote these short stories that have been compiled in that wonderful New York Review of Books publishing. The Adventures and Misadventures of Mackerel. If you like magical realism and you want to get lost in a kind of bizarre but beautifully written, I would recommend that highly. As he was actually best friend with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and the two of them would read each other's work. So very interesting text.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to acknowledge a couple questions here. I did see Carrie Merca had suggested two fantastic books to read during this pandemic are The Weight of Ink and Gentlemen in Moscow. Any thoughts on those two texts? I'm going to plead ignorance. Carrie, if you want to tell us more about them, feel free to jump on and get us, and we will collect the titles and authors mentioned in this happy hour for someone who asked, and make sure that we have a chance to get them out there. So The Weight of Ink and Gentlemen in Moscow are two texts recommended by Carrie Merca. And Kristen Mulligan writes, "Hi Pam, just wanted to say hello and that I have such fond memories of studying Mcewan, Forster, especially that scene from the film with Redgrave walking through the grass, Coetzee, Mcewan, and Atwood with you, though I've been seriously avoiding her lately." So Lincoln in the Bardo is also great. So you have some fans out there, Pam.
Oh, well, I'm very lucky. Hello, Kristen.
And Diana Newton hits the nail on the head with, a suggestion, Love in the Time of Cholera. Boy, we have taken the circle full. We've gone from magical realism, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and pandemics, all wrapped up in one. That's a great suggestion. So thank you for that, Diana. And please, folks, keep them coming if you have suggestions for us. And then Carrie Merca is saying, "Oi to the Vey, how have you three not read these amazing books, both historical fiction?" So Gabriel, let me ask you about historical texts, perhaps texts that deal with historical situations. Are there any that come to mind? Any other texts you would like to? It doesn't matter. Did you bring other texts for us?
I do have it's not necessarily historical fiction, but it belongs to our history, and it is in line with some of the things you've been saying about grief and trauma and the importance of literature as a practice that helps us deal with grief and confront trauma. Specifically, for me, the most powerful book I've ever read, not my favorite book and not a joy to read, but the most powerful book I've ever read is Émile Zola's Germinal
Sure.
in English. It's as bleak can get. It's about miners, a miner strike, and it goes into great detail about the suffering. I mean, every time you really think about your own pain, I think it helps to read that book as the kind of that book is a reality check, has been a reality check for me about the suffering of others, because of the way it presents it. And you have basically in the darkest hole of the earth, two individuals who can only really think to tear each other's throats out at the end of the day. And so it's kind of a bleak picture of human nature, but the moments of hope stand out that much stronger. Those little bits of light that come through, like Leonard Cohen says, there's a crack in all things, that's how the light gets in. And Germinal is like that. I mean, it has these moments of they can be hallucinatory. Somebody can be hallucinating a dream, and that hallucination, even though it's not real, can have a certain hope to it.
It's a beautiful text. It's a text I teach in my French history courses, of course, in the 19th century French history course I teach. And I'm struck, Gabriel, by that text in particular in thinking about labor. And here we are in this situation, we're talking about working from home, but we're also talking about a real divide in our society between essential workers, some of them who have called themselves, I actually feel more like a hostage, not an essential worker. If I want to keep my job, I have to keep coming into work. So I do think that it gives us a chance. That Germinal would be an interesting book to think about, not just about the human condition, but also in particular about labor and about who suffers and who does the work
and who's disposable. That a certain there are disposable people, and it's horrible. It's horrifying. And it really does, and we are reliving that actually, where in a kind of a situation where politicians are deciding what's an acceptable amount of death, who can die and who ought to be lived, how much resources should be devoted to saving, the prime minister versus somebody who's a grocery worker, right? And so I do think, it's important to confront those issues too.
And I do think that we're in this really interesting position where we can think about this with some time and some intention. Hopefully we will be thinking about this in this period, as opposed to it's hard to think about, the labor of those that we take for granted when we're laboring ourselves in a normal everyday life like that. So that's a great text, and one I would not have thought of to read during a pandemic, but an excellent choice. I know someone who deals a lot with books, and unfortunately this person deals with books in a public place, and I would like to introduce our mystery guest number 1 at this point, and I want to thank Pam and Gabriel for your wonderful suggestions and help me interview our mystery guest. So let's bring up our mystery guest number 1. Let's see this face and this name, and we'll find out who this is. Where is it? Hey, look at that. It's Susan Brown. Are you the director? Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Happy Hour. You're doing it right. You're doing it right. The head of the Chapel Hill Public Library, director of Chapel Hill Public Library, head of the town's art commission. Am I getting these titles right?
Sure, just keep going.
Yeah, exactly. President of books in Chapel Hill. But the Chapel Hill Public Library is an absolutely essential place. And Susan, what does a library do during a pandemic?
Well, let's see. We close our doors. And the day that we close our doors, we tell the public that we're closing them, and everybody comes. So if there is a hot spot, a ground zero of community spread were to happen in Chapel Hill, it may have been Chapel Hill Public Library on March 13th. So it's not an easy decision to close a library, and we did it. And I think the word went out at about noon that we were closing at 6. And the word, it was the most pleasant melee, but melee is the word that we use. People just came out, parents, seniors, kids, people of all ages, cleared our shelves. We had all hands on decks. Everybody was lovely. And we recovered from that over the weekend, and then it sunk in that this public institution, this place of comfort for people, this beloved Chapel Hill institution is just going to be closed.
They came in and hoarded as many of the public's books as they could in their own homes during this period, but they're missing what the whole spirit of the library is. It's not just the books.
Yeah, and so we've had a lot of great conversations with staff talking about this, thinking through it. So we're all doing well. We all still have jobs. It's great to work for the town of Chapel Hill. We have library staff doing everything from volunteering at homeless shelters to answering the phones for the town's information line to doing all kinds of things. But it's really it's a thing that we can't quite process yet, that the public library, that place that kind of like Waffle Houses stays open, is closed. And it's interesting. I don't think he'll mind if I share it. I didn't have a chance to ask him, but of all people, Daniel Wallace sent me an email today. And he lives near there, and he's been walking the trails, but he's also been thinking about that building being closed.
Your faculty colleague of ours, of course, yes.
Colleague and author of Big Fish and many, many other things. And he wrote me lovely words, but he was reflecting on that building being closed, and I'll just share my favorite line from this. He says, "Sometimes I think the library is about to explode with the pent-up power of all those unread books. How long can it last before they liberate themselves?" I love that.
Oh, yeah. I bet you're not interested in the books liberating themselves because they have to come back, right? But it's so true. I mean, just think about how you've bottled up this knowledge, and in a way, the whole university feels like this, right? The university is a place where it's not just, you know, the faculty doing their research. Like Gabriel's able to keep doing his research to a certain extent. You know, we're all able to teach in a certain sense, but the physical plant itself is a place of activity and a place where all of this good cultural exchange happens. And, you know, I'm so sorry that you're dealing with this. Has the library had any online presence or way of kind of maintaining a sense of its identity in this period?
For sure, yeah. So we have really great social media presence. Our Twitter feed and following is well known. We're on Instagram and Facebook, and we've done some things like virtual story times. We of course have lots of ebooks and things, but we're learning, as I'm sure you are, even though this is fabulous, it's not the same. It's that physical connection to the place and the people and the things on the shelf. So yes, we are still connecting, but we're trying to figure out what works in this time period, because you can't just take the pre-COVID things and plop them in the COVID world. So we are, like you all and many other people, figuring it out.
I tell you, if I close my eyes, I feel like I'm in back bar at Topo. It's just like a normal happy hour. You know, I don't know this feels normal to me. It's just like doing a happy hour.
Okay.
No, it's bizarre, believe me. And I love our attendees who are watching and enjoying, or watching us and staying with us. We hope you're enjoying it. That, you know, we know this is an odd way to do this. I do have a question for you, Susan, from our dear member of our advisory board. And this is a quote, critical question. Will the library be charging interest on late fees?
I'm assuming they're asking for a friend.
Yes, of course. I didn't name any. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't name names. Right?
Yeah.
I did.
No, we are not charging fines. Nothing is due now. There are no fines accruing. We are actually working on going fine-free for the long haul. So no, there's no interest, any of that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Susan. And I asked you to bring a book. Do you have a book recommendation for us?
Oh, Max, you can't ask a librarian just to bring one book. Just one?
No, go ahead. If you can do it quickly, like the end of those credit card commercials or something, you know.
So I will say I love being with my people here, because people have mentioned so many books, and I want to just say a couple of things. First of all, Lincoln in the Bardo is brilliant. And the ebook is even more so, or not the ebook, the audiobook. So George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo has something over 150 characters in it. And they are all lingering in the graveyard where Lincoln's son is buried. And the audiobook version has a different person, actor, writer, celebrity, whomever, doing each voice. And it is one of the best audiobooks I've ever heard.
I need to figure that out for my live reading of The Plague. It's all me, and it's getting tough.
In the comments, somebody mentioned A Gentleman in Moscow. Absolutely fantastic book, and I love the book. His book before that, the author is Immortals, and his first book was called The Rules of Civility. So to the person who mentioned Gentleman in Moscow, if you have not read Rules of Civility, you should read that. And then I also wanted to mention, and I'm going to get to my recommendation, somebody mentioned Howard's End and the film versions of it. There's a wonderful, more recent PBS, BBC version of it, which I loved the Hollywood version with Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins, but the new one is also very good.
Ma'am, are you familiar with this PBS version of Howard's End?
Yes. I've watched it and I like it very much. I just have a tremendously soft spot for the Hollywood version, especially for the wigs. It's such a wig film, and all of the wigs seem to be actors. They're alive. But in fact, the PBS one is lovely. And I would recommend that too, Susan. Thank you for the reminder.
Susan, what's your book for us? What are you
Okay,
gonna?
sorry. Here's
No,
my
no,
book.
it's okay. We know we have to add, we're gonna get all of your information on books because you just can't help yourself. But did you
Okay.
bring one text?
I did. One, and if by one, you mean two. So here we go. The book that I want to recommend wholeheartedly is, and I've got it here in my hand, it's the library copy. It's the Doomsday book by Connie Willis. And so the premise of the book, it's a little bit historical fiction and a little bit science fiction. And the premise of the book is, and this was written in the 80s or 90s, so it's far in the future. It's like 2035 or something. And we have figured out time travel. And the people who figured out time travel are the historians. So this is set at Oxford University, and a young graduate student, she's a female, is about to make her first jump back in time. And she's going to go back to England, to a small village before the plague, and to study life then. And right as she's about to make her jump back in time, a flu-type pandemic hits the modern world. And it comes through the lab, and they hit the wrong button as they collapse. And she's actually sent back to the midst of the plague years.
Well, she was well prepared, right? You know.
Exactly. So the story plays out. It's the story of her experience then, the modern world, trying to get her back, her engaging with the villagers, the plagues, the flu. Even if you don't think that you like science fiction and time travel, almost everyone I've ever given this book loves it. It's got a strong female character. It's a great book, and I will also just quickly put in a plug for a short version, or a shorter book. Also one of my favorite books about the plague years, which is called Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, which is a short literary novel, which I think of because that one is set in a small village, also in the plague times, but the plague comes to the village when a fabric merchant or a person brings fabric back. So thinking about now with the transmission of COVID and all of that, and that's what brings the plague to this small town. So Connie Willis, the Doomsday book, it's long. It's like 450 pages. And also Geraldine Brooks, Year of Wonders. And now I will stop talking, Max.
Oh, no, we want to hear more of your voice, but I do want to get time to talk to our next mystery guest, who is also, thank you, Susan, those are great recommendations. And I bet Pam, if Pam hasn't read that, knowing that Pam likes Margaret Atwood, this might be a good book to tie in, because Margaret Atwood plays between science fiction and, you know, and literary, and she's a high literature writer, but she delves into those areas that other people say, oh, that's science fiction or whatnot. I love Margaret Atwood's writing for that very reason.
Oh yeah, she certainly does that. She's a master of both the very highbrow and the less highbrow.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have the most highbrow guest of all. I'm going to introduce our guest, our next guest. Let's see if we can get that person, the spotlight to come on and unmute the video and unmute the sound. And it is. No, this is, you hear the drum roll? I got a drum set upstairs. I can go do the drum roll. There she is. Hello. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Talia Smart. She is the events manager and sine qua non of Flyleaf Books. Are wonderful. And you can tell that, Talia, right now, you are in the bookstore, are you not?
Yeah, I'm in the back. So there's lots of boxes everywhere. It's chaos here.
Box of books. Now we know this when we're talking to you guys are very busy. How is Flyleaf busy when nobody's out and doing things? What are you folks doing at Flyleaf Books?
So at first we were doing curbside pickup. We had the store closed, but we had people come park outside and we were running books out. Now we've stopped that because we just want to keep everybody as absolutely safe as possible, but we are doing $1 shipping for orders over $25, and we're doing local delivery to Chapel Hill and Carborough addresses. So we actually have the owner of Bow Bar driving deliveries for us every day. So it's pretty fun. We're busy. the phones are I mean, the first few days the phones seem to be ringing completely off the hook, but now that's calmed down a little bit. But for every online order we fill, it feels like 3 or 4 are coming in. So I mean, it's definitely good busy, but I don't have that much time to read, unfortunately.
Well, it's a lot different, isn't it? You know, selling a book, I mean, it makes you realize selling a book when someone comes into a bookstore and you can talk to them and you can give them the book and you can have this transaction, when it's otherwise just sort of impersonal. Like, I got the order, I got to fill it out. I guess what Susan says, the library lives because the library is a place where people go. And I know because Flyleaf Books is such a dear partner of ours, it's not quite the same, is it, as what the bookstore really is and the identity of the book.
I think we definitely do miss that part. And as events manager, I had to grieve for all the events that I had planned this season and was really excited.
A couple of them were Carolina Public Humanities, right?
Yeah, a lot of them, a good chunk of them, probably about a third of them actually. But it's okay. I think part of why we are doing so well in terms of, you know, the volume of orders is partially because the library is closed. I think we're getting a lot of those folks over here who really just need to get their hands on something to read, and they're willing to you know, go outside of their normal avenues for that if it means, you know, getting a book. So we're definitely lucky to have the support of this incredible community.
Susan, you can be ready for a bunch of used book donations coming up in about 6 months or so.
We'll take them.
Yeah.
So we asked you to bring up text. Are you reading do you have time to read during this whole business?
Yeah, I do. On my days off, I pretty much just sit outside on a lawn chair and get a little bit tan and read a book all day. So
And you have this lovely blue skin? What's it?
Yeah, you're turning violet, Max. Yeah, I think that I've tried a few things. It's been hard to find a book that really pulls me in exactly the way that I'm looking for. But this is the book that I've been reading, and I know it's been getting a lot of press, a lot of buzz. It's Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and I am loving it. I think it's really outstanding. The author is.
What's it about?
It's a memoir. It's the author of a book that was really big a few years ago called Love Warrior, about a woman who was working to overcome substance abuse and fix her marriage. And then right before that book came out, she was doing press with librarians and booksellers and met Abby Wambach, who was marketing her own book, and immediately fell in love with her. And so she ended up leaving her marriage and forming this new life as a woman in a same-sex relationship, figuring out how to trust her own self. There's a lot about identity and figuring out what feels right to you. And I think it's been really valuable in terms of getting to figure out some strategies to connect with myself during this bizarre time period.
Do you feel like this is
really
a time
great
for self-reflection? I mean, I feel like that's a lot of people are saying, you know, what do you do in a situation where you don't have a lot to do? Do you sit there and try to become more productive than I've ever been? You know, and like, I'm going to learn how to do something I've never done. And I think a lot of people have taken that approach. Do you double down and do work? Gabriel's you getting a little more research done, Gabriel, because you don't have as much demands on you, or?
No, because I can't. It's extraordinarily stressful, and so it takes me, you know, 3 times as long than I normally would. So, but I'm doing my best. I mean, I have deadlines. I don't want to bore you.
No, that's all right. Yeah, let's list out all the things that we have to keep doing, even though you feel it's the strangest thing, right? You feel like the world has come to an end, and yet we've got to keep going, right?
Look, Beckett, I can't go on. I must go on. I'll go on.
Exactly.
I don't know the exact quote.
In some ways, it feels a little bit liberating because, at least for me, a lot of the time I feel really overwhelmed by the amount that everybody else is doing in their lives and going to concerts and performances and reading and watching so many TV shows and all of these things. And I feel like now that the pause button has sort of been set on everybody, anything that I can do in my spare time feels like more of an accomplishment. And I feel like you know, I can watch one of Mo Willems' How to Draw the Pigeon from Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus, and I can draw that little character and feel like I've done something for the day.
Hey!
I can make banana bread and feel like, you know, give myself a round of applause for doing something. So
Hey, my bread
it feels kind of nice.
My bread is not rising, and I'm really, really upset with it, and I can't figure it out.
It's Passover, Max.
Yeah, I should unleavened bread, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to encourage, I also want to just throw out there that Jeff and Lynn Lang said to all the panelists that they want to recommend Weight of Ink. Susan, do you know this book, Weight of Ink? Tell us a little bit about it.
I do. Weight of Ink is wonderful, and I cannot think of the author's name. I want to say it's Rachel something or other, but her writing reminds me of Geraldine Brooks, who I recommended with Year of Wonders. But Weight of Ink, it also, if you read, what's the A.S. Byatt book? The big one.
Possession.
Yes, it's a little bit of that, with the central part of it is a woman who studies manuscripts. And it's been a while since I read Weight of Ink, but they could bring in more. Also, hi, Jeff Lang. It's a wonderful book, and it definitely makes me think of Geraldine Brooks's writing as well.
I have another recommendation. I tend to this is a book I recommended to a friend of mine on Facebook who was no other way to say it, but very anxious about these times. A brilliant, smart guy, but who spends a lot of time posting about how he had predicted this, and I predicted this would happen on this day, and now I predict that a month from now this will happen, and because I've been right all along, this is where we're going. He's very, very much, you know, wrapped up in the worry of this, and so I recommended this book in the spirit of distraction, and I recommend it to everyone all the time. In fact, it's the #1 book I recommend, and it's so silly. It's Frans Bengtsson's The Long Ships, written in the mid-40s by the Swedish writer. It's a Viking historical saga about a guy named Red Orm who goes everywhere from the Caliphate in Cordoba to the Volga River as a Viking to England. And it's written with a witty irony and good cheer. And it's just one of those, you know, you've gotten sucked into another place and you don't want to leave. And I feel like we're all kind of sucked into a world right now so historical fiction does that for me. It puts me in a place where I'm like, here I am in that. Is anyone familiar with this text?
Oh, we have a rec on it.
Oh, do you? Oh, good.
I've read it, but.
Well, you have to read it,
Talia.
Every single person I recommended it to has told me it was great. And this person, dear friend of mine, who is full of anxiety, when he read it, he says, yep, just what the doctor ordered. So that's my recommendation for everyone is The Long Ships by Frans Bengtsson. And we will curate all of the texts that people have recommended here and make sure that we have a list of them available. I do any other recommendations from the audience? We have about 5 minutes to kill here, so we will take any recommendations. And Susan or Gabriel or Pam or Talia, if you have one you haven't gotten to, we got time.
I have one.
Yeah, please, Talia, what do you have?
I have this book, which I haven't read in about a year, but it got me through one of the toughest times in my life when I felt the most depressed. It's called The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. This is the author of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
Okay.
It's about a man who is born in Ireland in the 50s. He grows up. He realizes that he is gay, and he has to struggle with what that identity means in Ireland through the second half of the 20th century. So obviously there's a lot of trauma, but it's the funniest book I've ever read. It was hilarious. The way it's written is so smart. Mm-hmm. It's just hysterical. I was laughing out loud the whole time, and it really takes you out of the present moment and lets you just merge in somebody else's crazy life. So
that's something I think
better for right now.
Yeah, that's something I think we really should emphasize, the desire for laughing and having a little, because it's, if you focus on the worry and you focus on all of that, it's great to be distracted, but something's just beyond distracted, actually just enjoying and living and, laughing together. So thank you for that. If it's one of the few texts that I've ever absolutely cracked up out loud, where I'm actually like laughing like I'm watching a television show or something. David Sedaris' ability to write that way. So is it in that vein?
Yeah, it's very different because David Sedaris has a very like Southern sensibility, but it's a similar sort of finding the hilarity in very mundane, everyday people kind of thing.
Cool. Pam, did you have something to say about humor in texts?
Talia reminded me of a comic writer that I like very much called Roddy Doyle. He has a number of very funny novels. The one that I'm most fond of is called The Commitments, and there's a film of that as well.
The music, right? The musical group.
It's about pop music. Yes, yes, about a talented young man who puts together this wonderful pop group in Dublin. And the way that they come together, they commit themselves. It's all about commitment and how commitment gets broken, and how they have some success, and then of course how they lose their commitment and they all fall apart. But he's got a wonderful sense of Irish culture. He's got a wonderful sense of the language, the common language of the people. It's very naughty. It's beautifully funny, and in the end, it's kind of inspiring. So he's definitely someone I would think of in terms of getting a laugh.
Thank you, Gabriel. How about a funny German text?
I find Kafka to be very funny.
Yeah, of course you do. I do too, in a sort of a Schadenfreude type way, right?
Actually, Kafka used to invite friends to his house, and he would read his texts out loud to them, and he would laugh unbelievably. He wouldn't be able to get through his text because he would be laughing so hard. It's actually true. And actually, if you next time you go read a Kafka story or a novel, think Buster Keaton. It's also he was very influenced by Buster Keaton and slapstick. There's he's the judgment. The father will jump out of bed. He's sick, and then he jumps out of bed and is threatening, and the blanket goes up into the room and comes down in a very artful way, and he's gleaming with insight. It's very funny.
And that's great. So
there's no hope. There's hope, just not for you.
Pam, I appreciate you mentioning the commitments as well, because in our house, being a music maker myself, we have set up an entire, our living room has been transformed into a music making place, and I'm hopeful that it stays that way for the rest of eternity. But yeah, don't tell everyone else in my family. So
sounds lovely.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. We're doing our best to maintain the spirit of humanistic dialogue and reflection, and talking about these texts with you has certainly made me think. I mean, we'll get this list for everybody. It certainly made me think a lot about the power of literature and the power of words to give us solace, to make us make comparisons, all of that. And we've got some good text to work with. I thank all of our participants for holding on to the idea of public humanities. This is something that it's hard to do in this format, but we're doing our best. I want to reiterate our programs coming up next Wednesday. Next Wednesday is a limited, so get on it first, get on it fast, because it's a limited group that we're going to be having a discussion. Every one of you participants will get a box, just like Susan has, like Talia has, like Gabriel has, and even Pamela, but your box you'll be able to see a picture.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So there's that. We have our happy hour next week on music, some great guests as well as mystery guests. Our wonderful event the following Wednesday on restaurants in this era, and we'll be putting together as much content as we can. Please keep visiting flyleafbooks.com. Please go to the Chapel Hill Public Library website. Go ahead and say it, Susan Brown.
ChapelHillPublicLibrary.org.
That's it. And for information about those wonderful institutions, sure sign of civilization in our town, and when they'll be reopened, and what you can do to be part of this whole continuing conversation around books, and hopefully live in person. So thank you all. Thank you, Pam Cooper, Gabriel Trop, Susan Brown, Talia Smart. Be safe, everyone.